Dang it, you hit it. I've never done that ever in 5 years. Thanks, Chris, for showing me up right here on my own show. And thanks to you at home for staying with us for the next hour. We do have breaking news right now out of Washington, D.C. Tomorrow, of course, set to be the 10th day of the government shutdown. Still no deal tonight to avert the debt ceiling crisis that is set to arrive in 7 days, according to the U.S. Treasury Department. But tonight, there is action and active negotiation right now around those political standoffs. And that counts as news because that was not previously happening around these standoffs. Now, whether or not the action tonight, the ongoing action tonight, actually constitutes movement toward a resolution of these twin crises, that is the question of the hour and maybe the question of the year. Early this evening, 20 House Republicans went to the White House to meet with President Obama at the president's request. The president had actually requested a meeting with the full Republican conference, but the Republicans said no to that. They said they wanted to limit it to only 20 of their members. I don't know why, but that's what they did. On the table in that hour-and-a-half meeting between those 20 Republicans and the president was a House Republican offer. They said they would finally relent and agree to increase the federal debt ceiling, but only for 6 weeks. And they said they would only do that in exchange for negotiations with President Obama on larger budget issues and tax reforms. That deal was to suspend the debt limit until November 22nd, until the Friday before Thanksgiving. And the deal would not reopen the government. The deal did not address the current government shutdown. Well, coming out of that meeting, the New York Times reported very quickly that President Obama had rejected that Republican offer. Shortly thereafter, reporting suggested that the offer maybe had not been completely rejected. Congressman Paul Ryan came out of that meeting and said, quote, "The president didn't say yes and didn't say no. We're continuing to negotiate this evening." Then the House Majority Leader Eric Cantor, the number 2 Republican, echoed that sentiment.
We had a very useful meeting. It was clarifying, I think, for both sides as to where we are. And the takeaway from the meeting was our teams are going to be talking further tonight. We'll have more discussion.
Useful, clarifying, more talking, more discussion. See? That's the news. So the stalemate has turned into a negotiation, at least according to the Republican leadership. That is actually news. Shortly after that, Republican Congresswoman Lynn Jenkins told CNBC that the House Republican leadership is now debating whether or not to reopen the government. Not to just not hit the debt ceiling, but also to reopen the government. Whatever is happening around the government shutdown and the raising of the debt ceiling, these twin manufactured unnecessary political crises, whatever is happening around them is happening right now. And where this all leads, late tonight or tomorrow or very soon after that, is unclear to say the least. And that is why we have joining us now Luke Russert, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent, whose whole professional life revolves around this story now and forevermore. Luke, thanks for being here.
Yes, eat, live, and sleep it, whole 9 yards, Rachel. Quite a day, huh?
It's been hard to tell what's wishful thinking and what is actual progress. I know, Luke, that you spoke to House Republicans after at least some of them met with President Obama tonight. What did they tell you about that meeting? What are you able to report happened there?
Well, the talking point that was circulated through the members who left that conference was that they had constructive talks, that they were moving in a positive direction, that tonight, now as we speak, Rachel, just around the corner from me, staffers, Hill staffers, Republicans, are apparently figuring out a way to move forward on extending the debt limit as well as possibly funding the government with their counterparts at the White House. So when we woke up this morning, we were still under the idea that if the government was funded without any concessions, that was unconditional surrender, as the speaker said, and the president said he would not negotiate. So apparently they've backed off of that a little bit, and negotiations are now underway. But what's fascinating is talking to Republicans throughout the day, there's really been a change. And the idea behind that change I would associate with these 2 polls that have come out. Yesterday, Gallup putting the favorability of the Republicans at 28%. Then our own Wall Street Journal NBC poll, which actually showed that because of the government shutdown, the president's health care law has become more popular. Those have both really resonated with a lot of Republicans here on Capitol Hill that have said, you know what, maybe it's not worth just the absolute destruction destruction of our brand to continue up this fight. And that's why I think you're starting to see these negotiations start this evening and very well could come to some sort of conclusion to avert all these things by this weekend and perhaps even by Monday, like Ms. Jenkins said.
Well, on that point about what Congresswoman Lynn Jenkins said, all day long we were hearing, even once the Republicans were willing to talk about extending the debt ceiling, even if it was only for a few weeks, they were saying really consistently, no, this is not about a continuing resolution. This is not about restarting the government. This is just about the debt ceiling. We need negotiations before we talk about reopening the government. Then on CNBC tonight, Lynn Jenkins said they hope to have the government reopened by Monday. Was that progress made during the meeting with the president?
I think the progress was made definitely with the meeting during the president, because the president said, look, we need to figure out a way to make sure the government stays open. And it was implied specifically from the White House and from Democrats they will not accept any debt limit bill unless you had some movement on funding the government. What I would also say, though, Rachel, is there is a group now that spoke up in the House GOP conference today. It wasn't the Southern conservative members, but it was the Republican members from the Northeast, from the Midwest, from the coast that said this government shutdown is really hurting us. The polling is reflecting that. You're also seeing some discussions happening now in the Senate. Susan Collins of Maine has been tasked by Mitch McConnell to try and sort of figure out, is there a way to have a year-long extension to the debt limit? Is there a way to have government funding extended for a long time so you don't come back to these problems once again? So you're starting to see some break within the GOP ranks against the Ted Cruz ideology to shut it down over all else. And I come back, though, to the NBC poll, Wall Street Journal poll today, Rachel. I can't emphasize enough the effect that had in this building. It went around here like wildfire. I mean, these numbers, as Peter Hart, the pollster, said to our own Chuck Todd, in his 40 years of polling, he's only seen a negative number move this quickly for a party in 4 or 5 years after 40 years of polling. That has a lot of folks worried. When these guys hear you could have a Democratic wave if the elections were this November, that gets ears perked up, and that gets them to say, hey, you know what? Let's stop the government shutdown. Let's extend the debt limit. And let's go after the president's health care law, which has had problems with enrollment. And we haven't been able to talk about that because the media, rightfully so, has been focused on the government shutdown, the people suffering from that, as well as the economic catastrophe that could hit the world if the debt limit was not extended.
Well, Luke, what is happening, though, with the Southern conservatives and with the sort of Tea Party wing of the House Republican caucus? You're talking about how the other members of the House Republican caucus who aren't used to getting as much ink are speaking up and saying, these poll numbers look bad, we got to get out of this. But they've sort of been saying that all along, and it's been the Southerners and the Tea Partiers who have been driving us to this point that we can't seem to otherwise get out of. I mean, are they going to go along with this? Is Boehner going to have to defy them in order to do this? Is he going to have to do this with Democrats?
Well, that's the big question, Rachel, and it all depends on what exactly comes out of these negotiations. But when you have a guy like Paul Ryan, who's referred to here as sort of the Tea Party conservative whisperer, who's the guy associated with leadership that is trusted by the most right-leaning members of the House Republican Conference, when he is single-handedly in the negotiations with the president trying to say, hey, guys, let's try and figure out a way forward, that carries a lot of weight and that carries a lot of capital. Now, I think the debt limit being extended, they shouldn't run into any problems with that so far. The issue of government funding, though, will face an uphill battle in the House of Representatives. Something will have to be conceded to by the White House for them to get something, whether that be a medical device tax, means testing for those who are on the president's health care law. Medicare means testing might be a little bit extreme. They might not give all that away. But there'd be something there, especially if it was in the context of a larger deal. I just think, though, when we've had this shutdown for 10 days, and these guys who have been leading the charge on it had no plan for what to do if the polling suggested it was a complete and utter disaster, and they've really lost the sway with the 50 to 60 or so members who kind of go along with them but still have an ear with leadership, and those folks are kind of going to say, hey, enough is enough.
Yeah, and on that issue of whether there's going to be any concessions to them, guys whose political prospects have gone down the toilet as fast as the Republicans have in this process are not in any position to be demanding concessions from the White House.
No, and if you do see anything, it would be for a year-long deal. It wouldn't be for a 60-day deal by any means.
Absolutely. Luke Russert, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent. You have a long night ahead of you, sir. Thanks for
having me on. Take care. Be well.
What Luke was talking about there in terms of the Wall Street Journal NBC News poll and it having a salutary effect not just on Republicans who fared very poorly in the poll, But on the actual pollsters, who were described today as having their jaws dropped by what they found in the new poll, we've got the details on that poll coming up next. And it is, even for a jaded person who doesn't care about polls, pretty freaking shocking. That's next.